first bubble floated weightless through a sunlit hallway, a tiny prism refracting rainbows and laughter in a house where joy had long been forbidden. "Stop that! This is not a circus." The voice that thundered belonged to Arthur Callaway, billionaire tech mogul, whose presence in the world was felt through markets, mergers, and the hush that fell when he entered a room. In his mansion, silence was discipline. Clean lines, expensive art, and order, absolute, unyielding. It had become his armor after loss, a fortress for a family broken in the places no fortune could fix. His son, Oliver, was the sole bright contradiction to the cold perfection. 7 years old, small and featherlight, with deep hazel eyes that refused to meet anyone's gaze. For as long as Arthur could remember, Oliver had been silent. Diagnosed on the autism spectrum, the boy communicated through patterns and movements, fingers fidgeting while the world blurred by. Speech therapy, medical experts, exclusive programs, anything money could buy, had failed to elicit a single word. And in the world of the Callaway estate, the staff knew the rules. Do your work, intrude on nothing, make no noise. Joy was suspect, play was for the poor. The one exception, if anyone noticed, was Elsa, the maid from Louisiana, her skin the rich brown of spilled molasses, her laughter tucked away for safekeeping. Hired for her steady hands, she stayed for Oliver, whose quiet isolation called to a part of her memory she never spoke of. Elsa's ordinary world was a balancing act, dusting mantles while singing softly under her breath, folding laundry with gentle stories, leaving small acts of magic in a home braced against wonder. Where others saw only rules, Elsa bent them with kindness, finding the little corners where Oliver retreated, always bringing him the simplest treasures, feathers, leaves, bubbles. And so it was that on a cold March morning, sunlight pouring through the glass, Elsa knelt at Oliver's side and dipped a blue wand into soapy water. She blew, a miracle born on her breath, and the bubbles tumbled and danced, orbiting Oliver, who watched with a fascination as spellbound as moonlight. It was that moment, the most human, the most unscripted, that Arthur walked in. For a split second, silence hung in the air, broken only by Oliver's soft little gasp and the shimmer of a dozen bubbles floating toward the ceiling. Arthur's anger detonated. "What are you doing? My house is not for amusement. You're dismissed. Now." Elsa's smile faltered, her hands trembling as the wand fell to the floor. She tried to explain, to apologize, but Arthur was unmoved, seeing only a breach of order, a noise in the clean, cold data of his world. As Elsa gathered her things, heart stinging, Oliver flapped his hands in agitation, unable to bridge the distance between his world and his father's. Yet as the bubble wand rolled away and sunlight caught the last lingering sphere, something glimmered in Oliver's eyes. What no one in the Callaway mansion could yet understand was that, in their effort to banish chaos, they had driven wonder underground. And sometimes the smallest, most fragile thing, the gift of a bubble, was enough to crack the walls that pain had built. And just as Elsa reached the threshold to leave forever, Arthur would be faced with a miracle no doctor or dollar had ever promised. For in a single heartbeat, the boundaries of silence and love were about to shatter. But that morning, as the front door clicked shut behind Elsa, no one saw the storm that was coming, and how joy, ruthlessly banished, would find its loudest echo in a word that had never been spoken before. The Callaway mansion felt frozen, every echo of Elsa's footsteps swallowed by the oppressive hush that followed her dismissal. The housekeeper scurried to cover Elsa's chores, guards avoided Arthur's gaze, and the head butler glanced nervously at Oliver, now sitting on the living room rug, knees hugged to his chest, eyes lost somewhere unreachable. Arthur retreated to his office, phone glued to his ear, voice sharp as ever. In his mind, the matter was closed. Discipline restored, disobedience removed. If a maid couldn't follow rules, she didn't belong here. There was always another to replace her. Emotions had no place in his calculus. But outside the world of adults, something else was unraveling. Elsa, suitcase in hand, lingered at the edge of the long driveway, heart thrumming with regret. She fought back tears, replaying the scene. Oliver's wonder, Arthur's fury, the feeling of being cast aside for one act of simple magic. Her own childhood flickered in her thoughts, who she had once been, who she was still determined to be, even when the world demanded silence and submission. She whispered a shaky goodbye, not expecting it to be answered. Inside, Oliver rocked back and forth, the absence weighing on him fiercer than any tantrum or lost toy. He searched for the bubbles. Gone. Elsa, gone. The house seemed emptier, the air heavier. Familiar routines, flashcards, puzzles, music therapy were left untouched. When his therapist gently tried to engage him, Oliver shrank further, hands over ears, shutting out the world that made no sense without the gentle woman who saw him. As hours crawled by, tension built. Arthur noticed Oliver's growing agitation. He refused breakfast, would not look at his father, and let out a distressed whimper every time a door closed. The staff reported that Oliver had not spoken, not even hummed, since Elsa left. Still, Arthur was unmoved. He'll adapt, he always does. Elsewhere, Elsa wandered the park nearby, unable to bring herself to return home. In her bag, she found the forgotten bubble wand, still wet, flecked with tiny rainbows. She sat on a bench, remembering Oliver's fixated awe, the hope that a simple joy could reach where expensive treatments never had. Around her, families played, laughter flickered in the air, and Elsa's resolve returned. She may have lost her job, but she would hold tight to her dignity and the magic she had carried, even unseen. Back at the mansion, the day collapsed toward dusk. Arthur, checking emails over dinner, barely noticed Oliver's pacing, stimming growing more frantic, the need for comfort unmet. Suddenly, the boy spotted the stripe of sunlight filtering onto the foyer floor, just where Elsa used to blow bubbles. He paused, as if searching for a memory he wasn't sure he had the right to keep. And then the impossible happened. Standing in the silence, hands outstretched as if remembering the shimmer in the air, Oliver opened his mouth. A single hushed word spilled out, soft, tentative, and unmistakably whole. Bubble. The word echoed clear as crystal through the rigid, ordered halls. The butler dropped his tray. The cook peeked into the room, eyes swimming with disbelief. Arthur, stunned, spun around in his chair, searching for the source. Oliver, oblivious to the chaos he'd created, said it again. Bubble. The word became a beacon, a blossom shattering years of silence. The boy's voice at once fragile and transcendent. Astonishment rippled through the household, the balance shifting in a heartbeat. Staff whispered with awe, some crying openly, and as news traveled to Arthur, who rushed, breathless, to his son's side, a dawning horror washed over him. The maid he had fired for breaking the rules had just broken through the wall that no money, therapy, or force of will could breach. The miracle he'd been desperate for had come, not from discipline or data, but from the very thing he'd banished. And now everything in the house felt different, charged, uncertain, trembling with the possibility and the ache of regret. Because nothing would ever be the same again, and the choices made in anger now cast the longest shadow of all. But the true reckoning was still to come. Throughout the night, the Calloway mansion pulsed with an electricity no one could name. The staff clustered in hushed corners, eyes darting toward the upper floors where Oliver was heard softly repeating his new word, bubble, as if conjuring it could bring back the lost magic. Some were awed, a few uneasy, all reluctant to speak openly around Arthur, whose presence was now a magnet for uncertainty instead of control. Arthur grappled with a maelstrom of emotion, pride, disbelief, and shame spiraling beneath a mask of stoic efficiency. For the first time in years, he watched his son with the desperate gaze of a man spying treasure in a wasteland. He tried to coax Oliver with new toys, extra sweets, and pleas laced with a nervous urgency. "Say it again, son." But Oliver only stared at the light, brushing his fingers through empty air as if searching for Elsa's vanished laughter. Therapists arrived in a flurry. Speech pathologists, counselors, even a renowned behavioral specialist flown in at midnight. "Remarkable breakthrough," they murmured, studying charts and video feeds of Oliver's fleeting word. But their questions fell flat. What changed? They pressed staff members. No one dared mention Elsa, fear of Arthur's wrath matched by a nagging hope that perhaps, if order was kept, the miracle would repeat. Yet Oliver grew more restless by the hour. He paced the corridors at dawn, hands fluttering, voice caught between hope and heartbreak. Every bubble in his memory was a plea for the impossible, the return of a friend, the magic that only kindness brings. The staff tried valiantly. A junior maid blew bubbles in the sunroom, but Oliver shrank away, covering his ears at the harsh pop of synthetic joy. The butler read lists of words, bubble, balloon, biscuit, but Oliver stared through him, silent as ice. News of the miracle and Elsa's firing swept through the local domestic network. Old nannies, drivers, and housekeepers called incredulous, "The boy spoke after all those years?" And in every retelling, Elsa's small act of rebellion grew more luminous. Some whispered that Arthur should beg for her return. Others feared to whisper at all. Arthur's stubborn pride, now twisted with uncertainty, led him to scan Elsa's personnel file for clues. He recalled how she caught the sunlight in her stories, how she'd once dared to suggest that quiet doesn't mean empty, but his certainty, the foundation of his empire, now felt like quicksand. Elsa herself, meanwhile, wandered the city in deep sorrow, her head heavy with regret. She replayed Oliver's stillness, the glow in his eyes when bubbles danced. When her phone buzzed, first with texts from the cook, then a tentative anonymous voice message. "He spoke, Elsa. It was beautiful. He needs you." She wept for the first time since leaving. By midday, tension in the mansion reached a fever pitch. Oliver sat at the grand piano, absent-mindedly tapping the notes, not playing but echoing, a pattern, a wish. Arthur stood nearby, lost in the illusion of control, watching his fortune turn helpless against the invisible. A sudden outburst shattered the calm. Oliver, restless and agitated, swept his arm across the piano, books, toys, and glass crashing to the floor. The staff rushed in, panicked. Arthur, desperate now, gathered his son up in his arms, whispering, "What do you need, Ollie? Please, just tell me." And Oliver, for the first time, looked into his father's eyes, silent tears sliding down his cheeks. He didn't say a word. No fancy therapy, no reward, no command would bring back what had been lost. In that instant, Arthur realized his brilliance, his rules, his endless striving had accomplished what fear always achieves: isolation. He stared at the broken glass around them and at the silent plea in his son's gaze. As evening approached, Arthur made a decision that shook the mansion. He would try, for the first time, to ask not what could be controlled, but who could be welcomed back. But as the staff waited, hope mingling with dread, there was no guarantee Elsa would accept, or even forgive. For in the battle between order and wonder, love now demanded the most dangerous thing of all, humility. And as night drew near, the air in the Calloway home sparkled not with certainty, but with the fragile possibility of beginnings. If only Arthur was willing to see what kindness had always offered. Elsa hesitated at her tiny kitchen table, a mug of cold tea between her hands. The city's evening radiating a loneliness she rarely let herself indulge. She'd tried for hours to silence the ache, the guilt and longing for the child she'd left behind. News of Oliver's first word replayed in her mind, half miracle, half torment. Could it really be? In all the heartbreak, could their small moment have done what endless therapies never could? At the Calloway mansion, the tension was palpable. Arthur prowled the halls in restless desperation, replaying every word, every boundary shattered by the loss of Elsa. He listened again to a dozen voicemails and staff reports about Oliver's behavior. Withdrawn, silent, but now sometimes standing by the window, whispering, "Bubble to the gardens beyond." Each repetition was hope laced with regret. Arthur finally summoned his courage and dialed Elsa's number, voice stilted with pride and embarrassment. Each ring deepened his anxiety. When she answered, her tone was wary, soft, prepared to be hurled back into silence. Arthur tried for formality, but his words broke. "Elsa, I made a mistake. Oliver, he spoke. He needs you. I need you to come back. Please, I was wrong." Elsa was silent for a long moment. In that space, years of unseen service, of being underestimated, weighed in her chest. She could refuse. She owed nothing, but a vision of Oliver's face, bright with joy, called her back to compassion. "For Oliver," she whispered, "I will come. But things must change. You must let me bring joy, not just order. That's the only way." Arthur agreed without hesitation, humility flattening all his old defiance. Back at the mansion, the staff braced for the unknown, hope fragile as glass. When Elsa arrived, Oliver saw her from across the foyer. For a moment the boy froze, as if unsure whether she was a memory or a miracle. Then, with a gasp, a real audible sound, he ran, tiny steps awkward but determined, and threw his arms around her waist. The household watched, spellbound. Elsa knelt, her hands trembling, and coaxed the bubble wand from her pocket. Without words, she dipped it and blew. Iridescent spheres whirled, catching the last shafts of dusk. Oliver's face lit with a glow that could outshine any chandelier. And then, another breakthrough. Oliver turned, looked up at his father, and with newfound confidence, repeated not just "bubble," but "please." His intent was clear. He wanted to share the moment, to invite his father into the wonder. For the first time, Arthur allowed himself to kneel beside his son, eyes burning with unshed tears. The three of them watched the bubbles rise, new possibilities, fragile but unbreakable in their beauty. The breakthrough was not just Oliver's, it was Arthur's too. He realized finally that love and order, discipline and play could coexist. The house would no longer chase away laughter for fear of chaos. After Elsa and Oliver retreated upstairs, the staff allowed themselves cautious celebration. The butler wept behind a napkin. The cook sent up extra dessert. As night deepened, a new order settled gently over the estate, a promise that wonder would not be punished, that kindness must return. And for Elsa, the lesson rang as clearly as Oliver's newfound words. One real moment of magic, fiercely protected, could shatter years of silence and pain. But the greatest challenge still loomed. Could the Calloways, father and son, truly learn to nurture that joy without Elsa's constant guidance? For now, though, bubbles danced over the columns and halls, and for the first time in years, hope slept soundly in every room. Tomorrow would test these fragile beginnings. But tonight, the fortress had become a home again, and nothing could undo the miracle they'd witnessed together. Morning sunlight spilled gold over the Calloway mansion, banishing the last cobwebs of sorrow from its marble halls. On this new day, everything felt softer. No more the cold museum of silence, but a home waking up to the rhythm of life. Elsa and Oliver sat together in the garden, dewdrops sparkling around them. The maid's humble bubble wand, once a symbol of rebellion, was now a scepter of healing. Her gentle hands guiding Oliver's, coaxing him to dip and blow, to marvel, as spheres of color rose into new beginnings. Inside, Arthur paced, the night's revelation still replayed in his head, the words he'd finally spoken, the plea he'd never imagined himself making. Pride warred with relief, but mostly he felt uncertain, a man trained to command, now struggling to follow. When he stepped outside, he froze, witnessing his son in a soft puddle of laughter. Oliver's eyes, so often guarded, flickered with anticipation. Would his father join in or retake control? Elsa glanced up, not with fear or deference, but with gentle expectation. "Would you like to try, Mr. Calloway?" Her question carried no edge, just the simple invitation to joy. For a moment, Arthur hesitated, afraid of looking foolish, afraid of failing where discipline was useless. But Oliver, miracle child, wordless for years, held out the wand for his father. It was as if a bridge appeared, from loneliness to connection, from stoic power to parental vulnerability. With clumsy hands, Arthur accepted. He dipped, he blew, bubbles burst and reformed, and a shaky, uncertain smile crept across his face. Oliver giggled, the sound raw, infectious, and unburdened. Elsa cheered softly, her heart singing to see the walls finally break. Then, as if the air had been waiting, Oliver said another word, "Together." His voice, still small, blossomed like spring, his first spontaneous phrase, a plea and a promise. Arthur's knees buckled. He dropped to Oliver's level, gathered him into a trembling embrace, and let himself weep. For the first time, he didn't hide his tears. He held his son, murmuring apologies, gratitude, hope. The staff watched from the windows, some openly crying, others silent with awe. The mansion, so long ruled by fear of imperfection, now echoed with the honest music of forgiveness and discovery. Soon after, therapists arrived for their midday session. Elsa greeted them, not as a subordinate, but as an equal partner in Oliver's care. Her insight now on record, her wisdom recognized. The team marveled as Oliver responded not just to instructions, but to shared play, bubbles, laughter, touch. Arthur, his perspective forever altered, convened the staff and made an announcement. There will be no more banishment of wonder in this house. Elsa is not just rehired, she's family, and her role is to help us all keep our hearts open. And for Oliver, joy and love are now the only rules that matter. The word sent ripples through every corner of the mansion. Staff who had lived in fear found their voices. Elsa was embraced not as a servant, but a healer. The old order was gone, replaced by a community in which every act of kindness mattered. The greatest victory belonged to Oliver. Each day now brought a new word, a new step, a new doorway to the world. But for Arthur, the true miracle was this. He was no longer isolated by grief, nor blinded by pride. Through love, humility, and the courage to admit when he was wrong, he'd become, at last, the father his son always needed. And as the sun set, casting the mansion in rose and gold, Elsa watched father and son in the garden, framed by drifting bubbles and laughter. In that moment, the house was truly home, healing, luminous, and alive in every possible sense. And all because a maid dared to believe that wonder should always have the final word. With summer's arrival, the Calloway mansion gleamed with more than polish. It resonated with a new warmth woven through its marble windows and hearts. Gone was the rigid hush that once pressed on every corridor. Instead, laughter now drifted from room to room, and no one flinched when joy interrupted routine. Bubbles became a daily presence, rising in the garden, swirling through breakfast sunlight, refracting possibility even in the smallest moments. Elsa, no longer just a maid but a cherished ally, led not only Oliver but the entire household into a future no one could have predicted. Her days began not by treading carefully, but by teaching staff how to coax happiness from even the simplest tasks. She hosted magic minutes after chores, 10 minutes set aside each day for anyone, child or adult, to share a story, sing, or blow bubbles. The housekeeper, usually so stern, surprised everyone with her operatic humming. The butler read poetry, his voice quivering at first, then steadfast. Oliver, the miracle child, found his world expanding at a dazzling pace. Words began to flow, hesitant, then certain, then gleeful. Please, more, this, love. He led his father through games, asked for new songs, and, most remarkable of all, reached out to the other staff, inviting them into his small, brave circle of trust. Each breakthrough, large or small, felt like sunlight after rain. Arthur's transformation was the most extraordinary of all. Gone was the cold autocrat. In his place lived a man learning, awkwardly but earnestly, to be both leader and learner. He spent mornings with Elsa and Oliver, learning the rituals of play that once frightened him. He held meetings not from behind a desk, but in the garden, letting the unpredictable joy of family life steady him more than any business deal ever had. He apologized to Elsa, not with grand gestures, but with humility, with listening, and with space for her wisdom to lead. The staff, long relegated to shadows, now formed the core of a true household community. Dinners were loud and filled with stories, birthdays and milestones celebrated together. The mansion became a landmark not just of wealth but of healing, kindness, and the power to change. And for Elsa, the change resonated far beyond new respect or security. She saw in Oliver's progress and in Arthur's journey toward fatherhood the proof that the world becomes less lonely every time one voice dares to echo hope. She sent money home to Louisiana and told her mother over the phone, "They see me, they hear him, and together we're finding joy again." When journalists asked about Oliver's miraculous transformation, Arthur only smiled, looking to Elsa and his son. The greatest breakthroughs come not from power but from presence, and wonder is never a mistake. As the seasons turned, the Callaways opened their home to other families searching for hope. Elsa led workshops, showing how patience and imagination could build bridges no therapy alone could promise. Other children, once silent, began to find their words in games and stories that grew from acceptance, not expectation. At the heart of it all, Oliver, now a talkative, curious child, blew bubbles with his father in the garden, each one catching the light, vanishing into the sky above. And in that golden glow, the legacy of one brave woman, a child's first word, and a father's humility proved enduring truth. When joy is finally set free, every home, for a moment or a lifetime, can be healed, made whole, and filled with the echo of miracles that had always waited just out of reach. Even the most silent heart, given the chance, finds its voice. And so the Callaways' home, once a fortress of silence, became the world's clearest testament. Sometimes a single bubble is all it takes to start the rest of your life.